Typically, when you think of both James Dean and Paul Walker, you will think of two things: great movies or being great in movies, and unfortunately, the car wreck that took their lives. Both men leaving an incredible legacy in both the auto industry, especially with racing, and the movie industry. What some don't know is that there's actually a decent amount of striking similarities between both James's death and Paul's death, aside from the fact that they were a young actor that passed away in a car wreck. Credit to Pinterest for this picture. You might not be able to see it. I can move out of the way a little bit. Both men passed away in a Porsche. James died in a Porsche Spider that he was driving. Paul died in a Porsche Carrera GT that he was a passenger in. Both were a limited edition. Both were a Porsche. Both had only two seats. Both men at some point of that day before their passing was at a car shop. Paul was at a car shop in Valencia. James was at a car shop in Hollywood making sure their car was good. Not only did both men die in California, both men spent a small part of their day of their death in the Santa Clarita Valley. Paul actually died in Santa Clarita. James died about 2.5 hours north of Santa Clarita in Colome, California. Both men also passed on the 30th of each month. James passed on September 30th. Paul died on November 30th. Both men had posthumous film releases after they passed away. Giant came out after James's passing. I believe Rebel Without a Cause also came out after he passed as well. Paul had Heroes come out after he passed, and plus all the CGI and stuff like that. He was introduced to a little bit more film than James was after he passed away. This one's kind of sour. I don't want to speak ill of the ones that have passed away. Rest in peace to all four that were involved, but neither James nor Paul were at fault for their own deaths. James was driving, yes, but the college kid Donald that was turning, he caused the crash that killed James. And then Paul obviously was a passenger in the Porsche when his buddy Roger lost control and hit a lamppost and then a couple trees. Both men passed away in the later part of that day. James was pronounced dead at 5 o'clock. Paul crashed at 3:30, but it did not become public knowledge until 7:20. So I believe you go off of when he actually passed, which would have been 3:30, so about an hour and a half difference. Obviously, there's more differences than similarities. Again, Paul was a lot older. You had James by about 15 years. Obviously, James was 42 years older, but considering Paul saw 40, James saw 24. Paul was not driving, James was. Paul's car hit some lampposts and some trees. James's car was hit by another car. Both men, Paul died immediately. They said James had a faint pulse when he passed, or when he was in that crash, and he passed a little after that on the way to the hospital. There's more differences and similarities, but I just think it was really interesting to go and dig deep and find there's more similarities than what most people know. The best comparison that both James Dean and Paul Walker shared, despite all of the horrific comparisons they had for their crash, was what they provided Hollywood and the world. James looked at as one of the biggest pop culture icons of all time, the first pop culture icon of his time alongside Marilyn Monroe. Paul Walker obviously being one of the most important characters in one of the longest running film franchises in American history. A combined age of 64 between both James Dean and Paul Walker, but of course it's never about how long you are here, it's about the impact you make when you are here. Their impact was profound, the legacies are cemented for both James Dean and Paul Walker, and in the afterlife, for as tricky as it sounds, I think we can take assurance in knowing that both James Dean and Paul Walker are competing in some sort of drag race together as we speak.